The war was already drowning Westeros in smoke and blood when the Ironborn struck. Balon Greyjoy, in his stubborn pride, had chosen the losing side, as if the sea itself could shield him from Robert Baratheon's fury and Eddard Stark's cold. Justice. It was during one of those final bloody clashes at Pike that Ned found himself standing over the boy, Theon Greyjoy, the last surviving son caught within the carnage. The boy was little more than 10, his hands trembling as he reached for a fallen axe, though his eyes were defiant. He was Balon's heir, the last piece of leverage that might force the Ironborn to bend. In the true history of Westeros, Ned would have taken the boy alive. But here, with the stench of salt water and fire filling his lungs, Ned made a different choice. Perhaps it was exhaustion, perhaps the grief of all the dead that weighed upon him, or perhaps it was just cold, stark judgment sharpened by the memory of southern lords whispering that his mercy made him weak. With a grim expression, Ned drew Ice, the great Valyrian steel sword of House Stark, and ended Theon's young life with a single swing. The silence that followed was heavier than the crash of waves. Ned's bannermen exchanged uneasy glances. Some thought the deed necessary, better to kill the whelp than raise a wolf pup in a kraken's skin. Others felt the chill of dishonor, for killing a hostage was no small sin. But Ned had already sheathed his sword. He would not explain himself. He had given the Ironborn no son to hope for, no pawn to hold against the North. He had given them only ashes. Word of the act spread swiftly. By the time Robert Baratheon received news of the boy's death, the rebellion was already shifting toward its bloody conclusion. Robert, drunk with victory, brushed it off with little care. "The Krakens are snakes," he told his lords, "and Stark has chopped off the head of the nest." Yet in Pike and the Isles beyond, the insult festered like a poisoned wound. Balon Greyjoy did not grieve in silence. He raged, vowing that no Stark ship would ever again sail unburned across the Sunset Sea. Years passed. The war ended, Robert claimed the Iron Throne, and peace, such as it was, spread across Westeros. Yet in Winterfell there was no Theon Greyjoy growing up among the Stark children. Robb had no reckless companion to hunt with, no loud voice at his side when the halls grew too solemn. Bran never learned to scowl at the japes of a boy who wasn't quite brother, but not quite enemy. Sansa never rolled her eyes at his arrogance, and Arya never loathed him as another swaggering fool. The absence was small, but it rippled quietly through the years, altering the bonds within the Stark household in ways none of them recognized. The North itself felt the difference more keenly. The Ironborn raids never truly ceased, but now they grew fiercer, darker. Villages along the Stony Shore and Bear Island bore scars from Balon's revenge, raids bloodier than history had known. Ned fought them back with grim resolve, yet every burning fishing hut, every slaughtered villager whispered of that one choice years ago. Still, the Starks endured. They always endured. But choices never stay buried in Westeros. By the time Robert's reign began to sour under debts, plots, and Lannister whispers, the Greyjoys had already set their sails for vengeance once again. Their rebellion rose sooner than in true history. 5 years earlier, with the salt banners unfurled in storm and spray, Balon no longer sought crowns or thrones. He sought only to bleed the realm that had butchered his son. And so the sea boiled with war once more. The banners went up too fast for the realm to breathe. Fishermen along the Stony Shore saw the first. Sails in the grey dawn, black and cruel, the kraken rippling in the cold wind. The raiders came ashore with axes already wet with spray, moving like men who had forgotten fear. They did not shout a king's name or a god's blessing. They shouted one name only, Stark. They wanted the North to hear it and remember why. The rumor ran ahead of them like a startled fox. Balon Greyjoy had risen not for crowns or castles, but for revenge for his dead son. He swore the sea would carry fire to every village that sent a tithe to Winterfell. In King's Landing, Robert took the ravens with a snarl and a laugh that was half a growl. He slammed his cup on the table, and wine splashed his hand. "Let them come," he said, all storm and thunder. "We'll break them like driftwood." Jon Arryn did not laugh. He read each letter twice, calm as winter stone, and said the words that mattered. White Harbour burned. Bear Island fought alone. The stony shore bled. He sent more ravens faster. Stannis was at Dragonstone with the royal fleet that had not yet remembered peace. Paxter Redwine's ships were mending from the last war, but masts can be fixed, and sails can be sewn, and men can be called to oars when the realm is in danger. Jon Arryn told Robert to send Stannis north. Robert agreed, because it was the simple answer, and because Stannis never failed when duty called. In Winterfell, Catelyn kept the torches burning through the halls, even at noon. It was not for light. It was for steadiness. She held Robb in her arms and listened to the news Maester Luwin read in his even voice. The words fell like snow. Skegos sighted raiders. Barrowton packed its people inward. White Harbour sent word it would arm every man who could stand. Catelyn kissed the red fuzz of her son's hair, and for a wild heartbeat she hated the sea. She said her prayers for a man who did not pray. Ned had ridden west with the Mormonts, the Glovers, and the men of House Tallheart. He had kissed her. "Ibrow," said Little, and left her a steel promise. Winterfell would hold. The first fight came at Sea Dragon Point, where spruce forests lean hard against the wind. Ned had moved before the iron rang on the shore. He knew these raids like a winter. Fever. They burned hot, fast, and cruel, and the cure was steel and speed. He split his host into lean packs, sent Sir Roderick to shadow the coast, and rode himself with the Mormonts. Maege Mormont was iron in a woman's shape. She spat in the sand when the first grey sails showed. "They think Bear Island is an easy meal," she said, "but the bones of fools sink just like stones." The fight was ugly and close. The ironborn tried to force a landing and found themselves knee-deep in sucking sand with northern axes in their ribs. Ned's blade rose and fell, always where the line trembled. When it was over, the shore was a mess of broken oars and broken men, and gulls screamed like ghosts. Victory meant nothing more than breathing to the next dawn. Theon Greyjoy was no fool. He took what he wanted and was gone before a banner could chase him. While Ned bled them at Sea Dragon Point, longships slipped past at night and struck Deepwood Motte. Another pack ran up the White Knife, bold as pirates in a song, and put fire to the ships idling under White Harbour's walls. Lord Wyman Manderley sent out heavy cogs with men at arms, packed like salted fish, and the Ironborn laughed and burned what they could not take. The mouth of the river stank of pitch for 3 days, but the worst of it came with whispers of a madder Greyjoy. Some said Euron had been seen on the decks of a lean black ship, sails like wings, eyes like knives. He taunted from the fog and was gone before arrows could find him. Mothers told their children not to look at the water at night, because monsters love to be seen. When Ned heard that name, he felt a private cold. He thought of the boy he had cut down years ago and wondered if Balon dreamed of that swing every night, making it sharper and darker in the telling, feeding it to his brothers like salt meat. Ned did not write apologies. He sent orders. He set beacon fires along the shore and put riders to each hill. He tasked the mountain clans to watch the river mouths, and he begged no man to be brave when warning would save 10. He met with Galbart Glover in a wind-scoured camp and traced the coast with a stick on a frost-hard map. "We cannot chase waves," he said. "We must give them a mouth they think is soft, then teeth when they bite." Glover nodded and offered Otoran Square as bait. The word felt sour, but war is full of sour words. South Stannis came, stone-faced and exact as any ledger. He brought the king's banners and the king's law and the king's ships, and he did not smile when White Harbour's folk cheered. He set his captains to measure tides and sound shoals. He took advice only when it was sound and ignored every insult. Paxter Redwine's ships straggled in behind him like tired hounds, fewer than he wanted, but oak is oak, and iron is iron, and a steady hand makes the difference. Stannis heard the plan from Ned and made it smaller and tougher, as he made all things. Balon sat in Pike's damp halls and listened to the sea argue with the stone. He let no one speak Theon's name. He called the boy the Debt, and his men called him the Wrong, and between those two words a lot of blood fit. Asha spoke once, and said perhaps it was time to think of more than anger. Balon stared through her and told Victarion to show the North what iron means. When Euron laughed and asked if iron meant another funeral, Victarion's hand moved toward his axe. Balon only raised one finger and the room froze. "Bring me pieces," he said. "Bring me proof of stark fear." He could not stop looking at the far wall, where the torchlight made the rock look like a boy's thin face. The gulls wheeled low that morning, white specks against a grey sky, as though the world itself were waiting for blood. Theon Greyjoy stood at the prow of his flagship, Iron Victory, his hand heavy on the haft of his axe. He saw Torrens, square-sitting stubborn on its hill, smoke from its chimneys drifting like lazy ghosts. It looked ripe for the taking, too ripe. His instincts pricked like thorns, but pride smothered caution. He had promised his brother proof of stark fear, and no ironborn commander turned away from an enemy's door once he had knocked. The longships slid closer, the shallow keels gliding up the slow waters like wolves padding through snow. Behind the walls, there was no movement. No archers on the battlements, no horns, no rocks ready to fall. It stank of trickery, yet Victarion only spat into the river and growled, "The North hides, we'll drag them out." His men roared, axes beating against shields, the sound carrying across the water like thunder. Out on the horizon, hidden by low cloud and the turn of the river mouth, sails were waiting. Stannis Baratheon's fleet sat in silence, dark hulls sharp against the tide. He did not waste words on his captains. His jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on the narrowing channel that funneled the ironborn inward. The plan was simple, too simple, for Stannis to mistrust. Close the jaws of the trap and grind the raiders into splinters. He had no interest in glory or feasts. He wanted results, and he would have them. Ned Stark's riders had pulled back days earlier, leaving behind signs of panic and retreat. Farmers driven into the woods, fields abandoned, torches lit and left to gutter in the night. The bait was thick, and Victarion had swallowed it whole. Galbart Glover, riding with Ned, muttered that the sea-wolves were too greedy to resist such meat. Ned only nodded, his face unreadable. He did not like tricks, but he knew the sea gave no victories without guile. The boy's face, Theon's face, flickered in his mind unbidden. He pressed it down. "The North remembers," he whispered, though whether it was promise or curse he could not say. When the trap sprang, it sprang hard. The first sign was the wind. It shifted suddenly, driving the smell of pitch and tar into the ironborn fleet. Then came the shapes, black and sharp, sliding out from behind the headlands. Stannis's war galleys bore down with oars biting deep, sails pulled taut by the gust. At their head flew the crowned stag of Baratheon, gold on black. Behind, heavier cogs with wine-coloured sails lumbered forward, Redwine's contribution, their decks bristling with archers. Victarion cursed, his face twisted in fury rather than fear. "Oars! Turn her, damn you!" His men strained, but the channel was narrow, and already Stannis's ships were closing from both sides. The Ironborn had lived on water all their lives, but pride had driven them too far inland, where deep-hulled war galleys ruled. Arrows hissed down like rain, punching through leather and skin. The first volley cut down half a dozen oarsmen, their bodies tumbling into the water to be dragged under. A red wine galley rammed a longship amidships, its reinforced prow splitting. Oak with a groan like dying whales. Ironborn scrambled to leap aboard, axes flashing, but Stannis' men met them with cold steel and colder discipline. Ned and Galbart Glover watched from the bluffs as the sea turned to chaos. From their height, it looked like a trap closing. Krakens writhing in shallow pools, while hunters speared them from every side. Ned's stomach tightened, not with triumph, but with the grim taste of necessity. Every Ironborn who drowned was another chain in the long revenge Balon would never forget. He wondered if the boy's shade watched from the waves, eyes empty, mouth closed. On the water, Victarion fought like a storm given flesh. His axe shattered shields and split men in two, his voice booming above the din. But even his fury could not turn the tide. One by one, longships cracked and sank. Sailcloth burned, masts toppled, screams filled the air as men clung to floating timbers. Victarion's flagship was holed by a galley, the Iron Victory keeling hard as water rushed in. Still he bellowed defiance, dragging a Baratheon knight into the depths with him. By dusk the Bight ran red. Half the Ironborn fleet was sunk or captured, the rest scattering like minnows back toward Pike. On the shore, Ned rode down to the water's edge as prisoners were dragged coughing from the surf. Among them were boys no older than Bran, their eyes wide with terror. Ned looked at them long, remembering a different boy beneath his blade. He gave the order, prisoners to the dungeons of White Harbor, not the headsman's block. Justice had been done already. Too much of it. Stannis met him on the beach, his boots wet, his face harder than iron. "This was a victory," Stannis said flatly, as if daring Ned to disagree. "But Balon will not yield. He will bleed his people for every insult." Ned met his gaze, and for a heartbeat he thought he saw something almost like pity buried deep in the man's stern eyes. "He already has," Ned said quietly, "and he will again. The sea is a grave that never fills." The wind carried the stench of pitch and blood inland, curling through the woods, reaching Winterfell by memory, if not by breath. In the grate. All that night, as Catelyn set her babe in his cradle, she thought she heard the sea roaring in the stone. She prayed it was only her imagination, though her heart told her otherwise. The Greyjoys would not forget, and the North, though it stood victorious, would not sleep easy. Balon Greyjoy sat alone in the great hall of Pike. The sea pounded against the rocks outside, each wave like a hammer striking his skull. The news had come too fast. Dozens of longships lost, Victarion missing, perhaps dead, perhaps dragged, down by the tide. His men whispered in the shadows, afraid to speak his name too loud. The Kraken had been cut open, its arms broken, its pride drowned. He would not weep. Balon Greyjoy did not weep for sons, for brothers, for ships, but rage filled the holes where grief should have been. He paced the salt, slick floor, muttering about Starks and Baratheons, about a debt that could never be paid. The boy, Theon, his boy, had been butchered by Eddard Stark's great sword. Now Victarion too was swallowed by the sea. Balon clenched his fists until the nails bit blood into his palms. "They think this ends me," he growled to the empty hall. "But the sea is patient. The sea always returns." His daughter, Asha, came forward bold as always, her eyes sharp. "Father, the Isles are bleeding. The men grumble. We lost too much too quickly. We need to bend the knee before Robert brings his hammer down on us." Balon turned on her, his voice a roar. "Bend the knee? Do you think I will crawl to a stag or a wolf? I am no dog." He struck the table with his hand, the sound echoing like a drum. Asha did not flinch. She only stared, and in her silence was an accusation heavier than steel. In King's Landing, the news of the victory reached Robert Baratheon like sweet wine. He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his goblet, slapping his lords on the back. "Stannis has done it," he roared. "The Krakens are smashed. Let them cling to their rocks and salt. They'll not trouble me again." He called for feasts, for singers to make songs of the triumph. He named Stannis Lord of the Narrow Sea once more, though the title sat on his brother's shoulders, like a chain. But not everyone laughed. Jon Arryn's face was grave as he unrolled the parchment. "Half the ironborn fleet is gone," he said, "yet the Isles still stand. Balon Greyjoy still calls himself Lord of the Iron Islands, and every ship we sink is another grudge he nurses. This war cost the realm coin and blood we could ill spare so soon after Robert's rebellion." Cersei Lannister, still more lioness than queen in those days, spoke softly in her silken voice. "Then cut out the root, send men to burn the Isles to ash. Take Balon's head and end the name Greyjoy forever." She smiled when Robert's drunken cheer faltered, but Jon Arryn only shook his head. "A war on the Isles is not so simple. They are rocks in the sea, hard to hold and harder to rule. Better to let them rot in their pride than drown more good men." So Robert agreed, for once listening to reason. He declared the rebellion broken, the Greyjoys beaten, and the peace of the realm restored. The ironborn captives rotted in white harbor's dungeons, and the rest limped home to whisper their shame. Yet in the north, Ned Stark felt no peace. He returned to Winterfell weary, his hair touched with more grey than before. Catelyn greeted him with relief, though she saw the shadow behind his eyes. At night, when the hall was quiet, and the children slept, he told her in a low voice what weighed on him. "I ended a boy's life, Cat. A boy who had no sword but his pride, and now men die on both sides for that choice. I thought it would save the North. Perhaps it has only doomed us to more grief." She touched his hand, warm against his cold fingers. "You did what duty demanded. No man can see the end of every road." But even as she spoke, she knew her words were only balm, not cure. Seasons passed, but the memory of the rebellion clung like salt on stone. The ironborn raids slowed, but did not cease. Balon licked his wounds and raised Asher in the hard creed of vengeance. In Winterfell, the Stark children grew without Theon Greyjoy's shadow among them. Robb grew proud and strong, but lacked the rash friend who might have led him into folly. Bran climbed, Arya quarrelled, Sansa dreamed, but none of them heard Theon's mocking jests or saw his eager grin. The hole was small, but it was there, like a missing stone in a wall. In King's Landing, the lords grew restless. Robert spent coin faster than it could be counted. Tywin Lannister whispered promises of gold, while Varys and Littlefinger spun webs no man could see. The Greyjoy rebellion was already fading into memory, yet its ashes still smouldered. The realm thought itself stable. In truth, it was only waiting for the next spark. And across the sea, Balon Greyjoy still stared into the dark waters, listening to the waves crash against the rocks. He no longer dreamed of crowns. He dreamed of fire-consuming Winterfell, of wolves howling in the ruins, of Starks broken as he had been broken. He would bide his time. The sea is patient. Years passed like falling leaves, and the North settled into its cold rhythm again. The wars of Robert's rise and Balon's rebellion became stories told in mead halls, though the scars were still fresh for those who had seen their homes burned. Winterfell stood tall, its grey walls strong as ever, but even stone remembers. The Ironborn had not taken the castle, yet their shadow lingered. Robb Stark grew quickly, tall and broad-shouldered, every inch his father's heir. He trained with the sword daily, sparred with the guards, and carried himself with the quiet pride of a young lord. But he lacked something, a certain restlessness, a spark of recklessness that once might have come from a boy like Theon Greyjoy at his side. Robb was serious, sometimes too serious, his laughter rare and his decisions measured. The North loved him for it, but among the boys his age he seemed older than his years. More like a young man than a child. Bran was a climber, nimble as a squirrel, forever darting up the walls and towers. Arya ran wild with him, scuffing her. Dresses and earning Septa Mordaine's endless scolding. Sansa, graceful and proper, drifted into her songs and dreams of knights. Rickon was still too small to know anything but play. Together they made the halls of Winterfell loud and alive. But none of them knew the voice of the boy who might have teased them, argued with them, and betrayed them years later. Theon's absence was a quiet thread stitched into their fates, though none could see it yet. Ned Stark felt the absence most of all, though he never spoke it. Sometimes he caught himself looking at Robb with a flash of memory, the way Theon's grin had shone on Pike before ice fell. The boy had been proud even in fear, proud in a way that reminded Ned of young warriors he had seen die too soon. At night, in the godswood, he knelt before the heart tree and whispered to the old gods for forgiveness. The faces in the bark gave no answer. In the south, Robert Baratheon ruled from his iron throne with wine in his cup and hunting on his mind. The rebellion was behind him, yet his debts grew like weeds. Jon Arryn kept the realm together with patient hands, but cracks spread in the stone. Tywin Lannister's gold filled the gaps, and with gold came strings. Robert barely noticed. He had his crown, his wars were won, and he thought himself untouchable. But in Pike, Balon Greyjoy still brooded. He had bent, yes, because he could. Not face another hammer blow so soon after losing half his fleet. He had sworn oaths to Robert's envoys, but his heart swore different oaths in the dark. Asha grew into a hard, clever woman at his side, sharp of tongue and mind. She urged him to think of the future, of rebuilding, of survival. Balon only spoke of debts, of wrongs yet unpaid. Without Theon, there was no hostage in Winterfell to hold Balon back. The death of his son was an old wound, still bleeding. He raided the coasts in small bursts, testing the edges of Robert's rule. Never enough to draw the stag's hammer again, but always enough to remind the North of salt and fire. The Starks sent men to guard the shores each summer. The villages learned to watch the horizon with fear. Robb Stark grew into command during these years. By the time he was 16, Ned sent him with Sir Roderick to oversee the defense of Bear, Aeland, after another summer raid. Robb stood on the deck of a northern galley, watching the waves with solemn eyes. He fought his first skirmish there, driving off raiders with shield and sword. He bore himself well, though his face was pale. And he spoke little of it. Ned saw the steel forming in his son, tempered not by reckless laughter, but by steady duty. In King's Landing, whispers began. Jon Arryn's health faltered. Cersei Lannister grew colder, her twins taller, her hunger sharper. Littlefinger smiled in the shadows, and Varys listened at every door. The realm was turning toward storms, though few saw them clearly. And across the sea, the last embers of rebellion smouldered in Balon's heart. He had no son left to send as hostage, no boy to bind his loyalty. Only Asha, fierce and willful, who grew into the commander his house. Needed, but he did not want. Victarion returned at last, scarred from fire and battle, but alive, his silence more loyal than words. Euron's shadow passed in and out of the Isles, always laughing, always dangerous. The Greyjoy name endured, carried on black sails and bitter oaths. Ned Stark knew it was not finished. He told Catelyn once, in the quiet after a long day, a choice made in war never stays buried. It comes back years later, when you least expect it. She asked him what choice he meant. He did not answer. He only stared into the fire as though trying to see the future in the flames. The North slept beneath snow and stars, but it was not a peaceful sleep. It was the shallow rest of a man waiting for the storm to come again. The summer was fading when the ravens brought word that Jon Arryn was dead. Ned Stark stood in the godswood with the letter in his hand, the words heavy as iron. Robert Baratheon would soon ride north, it said, to ask his oldest friend to serve as Hand of the King. Catelyn found Ned beneath the heart tree, his face drawn tight. "He will ask, and you will say yes," she told him softly, "and the North will be poorer for it." Ned only nodded, for he knew she spoke true. When Robert arrived, it was with all the noise and cheer of the man himself, banners flapping, wine flowing, his laughter booming through Winterfell's halls. He embraced Ned like a brother, kissed Catelyn's hand, and slapped young Robb on the back. But Robert's eyes were older, his belly heavier, his step slower. He drank to the days of rebellion, when they were young and strong. He drank to Lyanna, though the name soured in his mouth, and at last he asked what Ned had feared. "Come south with me, be my hand, rule while I eat and drink and hunt. I need you, Ned, the realm needs you." So Ned went, leaving Robb as Castellan of Winterfell, with Catelyn by his side. Bran begged to go with him, Arya pouted, Sansa wept at the thought of leaving home. But Ned hardened his heart. Duty was no gentle master. The road south was long and uneasy. Catelyn's visit from Lysa Arryn in King's Landing, the warning of plots and poison, still echoed in Ned's mind. When he took his place as Hand, the city was already a nest of vipers. Cersei's green eyes watched him like a hawk. Littlefinger smiled too easily. Varys whispered too much. Ned kept to his honor, but in King's Landing, honor was a weakness, not a shield, and yet, without Theon Greyjoy in the world, some pieces shifted differently. When war broke out in the Riverlands, it was not ironborn ships that struck first against Robb Stark's cause, but only Lannister swords. The Greyjoys had no hostage to betray, no son to send back to Balon with promises of alliance. Robb's council never spoke of sending envoys to Pike, never dreamed of kraken sails riding beside wolf banners. The North stayed focused on the war, with the Lannisters alone. Still, Ned's doom unfolded as before. He uncovered the truth of Joffrey's parentage, the lie at the heart of the crown. He confronted Cersei with cold words and left her the chance to flee. He trusted Littlefinger's promises and was betrayed for it. Robert died on his hunt, gutted by a boar and poisoned by wine, leaving the throne to a boy who was no true heir. Ned tried to do right. He always tried. But in King's Landing, right and wrong were swords of paper. Guards seized him in the throne room. His men were cut down. Sansa begged for mercy. Arya slipped into the streets, a wolf among strangers. Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, was cast into the black cells to rot. Far in Winterfell, the news came like a knife. Catelyn clutched the letter until her hands shook. Robb read it aloud in the great hall, his face pale but steady. "My father is taken prisoner in King's Landing. The Lannisters hold him." The lords of the North rose as one, calling for war. Greatjon Umber slammed his fist on the table and swore to follow Robb wherever he led. Even the cautious Manderlys and Glovers bent their heads. The North would not abandon its lord. Robb was young, but the North was with him. He marched south with banners flying, his mother at his side, his direwolf at his heel. The battles came swift and bloody, Whispering Wood, River Run, the camps, and fords along the Green Fork. Robb proved himself not only his father's son, but a commander in his own right. And here the great change showed itself. There was no Theon Greyjoy to ride at his side, no eager voice whispering of glory and conquest. Robb's council never debated the Ironborn, never sent him to Pike on a desperate mission. Instead, the North stayed united. Their coasts still suffered the usual raids, but Balon Greyjoy did not rise in open war. Without Theon's presence, without the hope of his heir returning, Balon stayed in his brooding silence, his fleet nursing its wounds. This meant Winterfell did not burn. Bran and Rickon did not vanish into rumour and grief. Ramsay Snow, still a bastard in the shadows, had no chance to seize the castle under the chaos of Theon's betrayal. The Stark line for now stood whole. But even victories are poisoned in Westeros. Ned's head still fell to Ilyn Payne's sword on the steps of Baelor's Sept. Sansa still wept in chains. Arya still fled through the filth of the city. The north still cried out for vengeance. Robb was still crowned king in the north beneath the banners of his forefathers. Yet one wolf's death, one boy's absence, shifted the storm. Robb Stark's. War had more strength, more unity. The north and riverlands together, unbroken by kraken knives in the dark. The Lannisters still had their gold, their cunning, their allies in the south. But the Game of Thrones was tilting, just slightly toward the wolves, and far across the sea, Theon Greyjoy stared into the waves from his tower. The salt wind bit his face, and the gulls cried overhead. His heart ached with anger that never faded. His son was gone, his brother lost, his pride bent. He dreamed of vengeance, but vengeance without teeth is only a dream. For now he waited. The sea is patient. The war in the Riverlands burned hotter with every passing moon. Smoke rose from villages along the Trident, and the fords ran red with blood. Yet through all the chaos, Robb Stark's banners held strong. He was young, but his victories had carved his name into song already. The Whispering Wood, where Jaime Lannister himself was taken captive, echoed in every lord's hall, from River Run to White Harbour. At River Run, the banners of the wolf and trout flew together. Catelyn watched her son grow into a king before her eyes. He bore the crown of the North with the weight of his ancestors, not with the brash pride of youth. When his bannermen shouted him King in the North, Robb's face had been solemn, not joyful. Duty was carved into his bones, as it had been with his father. Yet the war was long, and choices were cruel. River Run's halls rang with debate. Some lords called for alliance with the Vale, others with the Stormlands. But there was no whisper of the Ironborn, no talk of kraken sails that might split Lannister attention. That door had never opened. Balon Greyjoy brooded still on Pike, but he did not rise. Without Theon alive, without a son to anchor his ambition, the old kraken's pride was wounded too deep. He raided coasts, yes, as he always had, but never more than that. The blow he had taken from Stannis and Ned years before was too heavy to forget. Robb's back was never stabbed from the sea. His war marched forward without that wound. In the north, Winterfell still stood whole. Bran still climbed, Arya was far away, Sansa a hostage in the capital, but Rickon's laughter still filled the halls. The small folk whispered prayers for their king in the south, but their homes were not yet ash and rubble. Maester Luwin still tended his ravens, Sir Roderick still kept the gates. The wolves of Winterfell were bruised, but not broken. For Robb, each victory came with harder choices. The Freys demanded marriage ties, and still Robb bent, swearing oaths he thought he could honor. He did not yet know how fate would test him. His bannermen pressed him for greater victories, march on Harrenhal, strike at King's Landing, burn Casterly Rock. Robb listened with patience, weighing words like stones. Without Theon's reckless voice urging him toward boldness, Robb leaned toward caution. But caution in war is a thin shield. The Lannisters bled, but they were not beaten. Tywin moved like a shadow in the west, burning and pillaging to weaken the Riverlands. Cersei ruled in King's Landing with her cruel smile, her son on the throne, his cruelty growing sharper each day. Sansa wept behind silk curtains. Arya was lost to them all, and Ned's ghost haunted the steps of Baelor's sept. In secret councils, whispers grew of Renly Baratheon, who crowned himself king in the south, with peach-scented banners and the support of the Tyrells. Stannis, grim and unyielding, claimed the throne as Robert's true heir. His letter carried by ravens across the realm. The War of 5 Kings had begun, though each king thought only of his own crown. Robb cared little for crowns. He cared for his father's bones, for his sisters, for the North. He cared for justice. His lords cheered him, but in his heart there was a quiet ache. At night, when the camps grew silent, he sat with grey wind by the fire and thought of the family scattered like leaves in the storm. Balon Greyjoy watched all this from across the waves, his spies carrying word back to Pike. He hated every raven that told of Robb Stark's victories, every whisper of a strong young king in the north. He dreamed of what might have been had Theon lived, how the boy might have stood beside the wolves, how the kraken might have risen sooner, stronger. But those dreams only twisted the knife. The choice made years ago at Pike had chained his house. The sea raged, but the kraken was bound to its rock. And yet, even without his rebellion, the Game of Thrones was cruel. The Freys still grew restless, watching for insult. The Karstarks carried their own griefs. The Lannisters sharpened their knives in secret. Robb's war was stronger without the Greyjoy betrayal, but strength alone does not win thrones in Westeros. On one quiet night, as the moon rose silver over the Tully banners, Catelyn found her son staring across the river. "You fight like your father," she told him gently. Robb's jaw tightened. "I only hope I do not die like him." Her heart clenched at the words, but she said nothing. The war was not yet done, and fate had not yet played its last card. The war dragged on year upon year, and the crowns on men's heads grew heavier than their swords. Robb Stark had marched farther than any boy of his age had the right to, yet still the fighting did not end. His victories were real, his banners feared, but the South was a pit with no bottom. Every step forward met fire, treachery, or stone walls too high to climb. Yet Robb's North remained whole. Winterfell had never fallen. Bran and Rickon still lived under its towers. Catelyn's heart, though burdened with the loss of her husband, still carried the fragile relief that two of her boys were safe. Without Theon Greyjoy's betrayal, there had been no burned villages in the heart of the north, no charred husks where children once laughed. Ramsay Snow lingered in the shadows, cruel as ever, but without chaos to cloak him, he was only a snake in the grass, not yet a viper with fangs. Robb fought on, winning battles but struggling to win the war. The Freys still demanded their due, pressing him to honor his oath of marriage. And Robb, headstrong in his sense of honor, still broke it. He wed for love, and the insult festered in Walder Frey's heart. Yet when the Red Wedding was plotted, it was a colder thing, not sharpened by the fury of betrayal at Winterfell. Rose Bolton's hand did not move as quickly, for he had no excuse of Theon's capture to mask his own disloyalty. The knives were slower to come out. Still, Tywin Lannister was not a man to waste a chance. Gold bought whispers, whispers bought daggers, and daggers bought corpses. The wedding feast at the Twins was set with long shadows. But the North was less divided, less wounded. The Manderleys, the Glovers, and the Umbers came with Robb in greater numbers, not broken by grief for burned homes. When the treachery began, when the music turned false and steel flashed in the torchlight, the wolves were not as easily slaughtered. Grey wind tore men apart before he fell. Robb's bannermen fought like cornered lions. Many still died, but not all. Robb Stark himself escaped the blood-soaked hall, dragged out by the Greatjon and his men. It was not victory, but it was survival. And in survival lay hope. Far away, Balon Greyjoy's heart finally gave out. Some said the sea took him, others that Euron's hand was behind it, but the truth mattered little. The Iron Islands bent into new hands. Asha pressed her claim, strong and clever, but Victarion stood with his iron axe, and Euron's shadow fell dark across them all. Yet their rise came later, their sails not yet black against the north. For the choice Ned Stark had made long ago, one swing of ice, had delayed their storm. Robb Stark returned to the north, bloodied but not broken. His crown was still on his head, though dented and stained. His people cheered him, for he had lived when doom had nearly swallowed him whole. He swore before the heart tree that he would never again risk the north so carelessly. He would guard his people, not chase southern thrones. The south is a pit of vipers, he told his lords. Let them bite each other. The wolf will guard the north. And so Robb Stark's war ended, not with triumph, but with retreat and survival. The Riverlands burned under Lannister gold, but the North stood, scarred yet proud. Winterfell's walls still rose, its heart still beat. Sansa remained in King's Landing, a hostage still, her songs turned to ash. Arya wandered far from home, her path twisted and dark. Jon Snow kept his watch on the wall, unaware how differently the world below had shifted. But the North had its king, and the Greyjoys had been checked before their teeth could sink deep. Years later, when men told the tales, they spoke of the wolf who escaped the wedding, the young king who returned to his people with fewer swords but stronger resolve. They spoke of the kraken broken on the rocks, its heir cut down before he could ever betray the wolves. They spoke of choices made in blood, and how a single death had bent the river of history into a different path. Eddard Stark had once swung his sword over a boy's head and told himself it was justice. The years proved it had been more than justice. It had been a turning stone, one that changed the flow of the war, the fate of the North, the lives of his sons. His ghost lingered in Winterfell's godswood, perhaps watching as Robb's children ran laughing under the red leaves. Safe for a little longer in a world where krakens had no teeth. The sea is patient, yes, but this time the wolf endured.